Good afternoon and welcome. We're delighted that you've chosen to be with us on this beautiful Tuesday. We are really excited about the time that we have together to share in a deep conversation about missions as advocates for people in the earth. I'm Ellen Seacrest, and I serve as the manager of global missions engagement for the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. And we're especially delighted that our guests are with us today who serve as our field personnel. We're delighted to have Jeff Lee from Macedonia, Jessica Hearn in Virginia, and Rick Burnett in Florida. We're also delighted that Sam Harrell will join us as well. Sam serves as the assistant coordinator for CBF and will help lead this environmental conversation that we are a part of today. So Sam, why don't you take a minute and introduce yourself to us and give us an overview of CBF Network for the Environmental Network and a little more about your role.
Yeah, so as associate coordinator of global mission, and apart from that, my very personal passion for being a steward of God's creation, as I began to listen around me in the fellowship and to my colleagues, many of whom were looking for a way they could be more connected to preserving this wonderful gift of the environment that God has given to us, and many of our field personnel already engaged and elements of environmental advocacy and stewardship in the very work that they do. I began to provide some leadership along with some colleagues on this issue by forming the CBF Environmental Stewardship Network, which is a Facebook group, and we meet around the General Assembly, and it's open to anyone, so we would hope that you would join us if you're interested. Prior to that, we had already begun to offer an environmental field component for seminary and divinity students. These divinity students would come on a field course of about 3 weeks to East Africa, where we would engage the people of that land and learn from them in terms of how the environment impacted them, how they were susceptible to a changing environment, and how the mission work interfaced with all of those things. So Kutana is our initiative around that. Most recently, in recognition of my colleagues who are already doing amazing work with the environment, we are establishing them or designating them in their field work as environmental advocates. So we're really glad today to be hearing from them.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that bit about that. And we're going to let each of our field personnel introduce themselves. And Jeff, we'll start with you today.
Great. Well, again, thank you for this opportunity to speak with you all today. I'm really excited, as Sam had mentioned, to connect with you all about environment, because the environment is something that I am very passionate about, and we all share that same passion for the environment. So yeah, that's me.
Sam, do you have a question you want to ask Jeff about his work?
I'm going to ask that a little bit later on as they describe their work.
Gotcha. All right, Jessica, go ahead.
All right, I'm Jessica Hearn, and as Ellen said, I work in Virginia. I actually work in Danville, Virginia, and I serve with an intentional Christian community called Grace and Main Fellowship. And environmental stewardship and sustainable living is one of our identity statements in Grace and Main. It is one of the commitments that we have made to each other and to our community. And so I am very glad to be here and talking about stewardship and creation care, and particularly how to do that in a more urban environment.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And Rick, a little about your work in Florida.
Hi, it's great to be with you all. I am in Immokalee, or I live in North Fort Myers, Florida. Our work is focused on the farm worker town of Immokalee, Florida. During peak season, which is ending right now, there's around 25,000 people who live there, and many of them are migrant farm workers. So they come in to help with harvesting tomatoes, melons, sweet corn, cucumbers, and other crops. And this is a really important area agriculturally. The irony is that Immokalee is considered a food desert, where quality food is difficult to access or is expensive. And so we have that irony of being such a major food producing area and a big portion of this community facing food insecurity.
Rick, one of the things that I appreciate about you, and one of the times that we were together for an Encourager Church, is every time I would see the name Immokalee, I could never remember how to pronounce it. So once you told me it rhymed with broccoli, I knew I was set after that. So thank you all. We're going to hear more about your work specifically in just a little bit. But Sam, you grew up in Africa yourself and have served with CBF for many, many years now. And your current role, both as a supporter and supervisor of our field personnel, help us understand a little about Environmental Stewardship Network and how advocacy pertains to our mission work at CBF.
Right. Well, I guess at the very outset, I like to think of the fact that we should be advocates for the creation that God has gifted us with, just because it deserves to be advocated for. Advocacy is an important role in highlighting and bringing to people's attention what's happening, whatever the issue. And creation is one of those things. The environment is one of those things that we kind of take for granted, and yet it's sort of the thing that holds us and makes our lives possible. And that this is becoming ever more real. Environment deserves our attention and deserves our care as a first step. I think moving on from that, I think it's very important that we understand how it relates to our work with mission. One of our key distinctives is transformational development. Transformational development really has to do with looking at systems that are oppressing people and curtailing their creative action as the children of God, and working to overcome some of those things that are the reasons for that suppression. And I would have to say that caring for God's creation is not something that's subsidiary. As I look around CBF work, probably 50% of our field personnel are engaged in some form or facet of global migration. And others are very involved in matters relating to global poverty, which are two of our huge contexts within CBF. And so we do a lot of work helping that migrant or that immigrant or that refugee to cope with reality after the fact that they have fled, or helping somebody who is suffering from poverty to the extent that they're robbed of their humanity. And my question is, what are we doing about preventing those conditions? And my theory is that the environment, it's more than a theory, the environment is playing a major role, or environmental degradation is playing a major role in causing migration and in causing poverty. So if we are really looking at attending to global poverty and global migration, then we better be looking at some of what's underneath. Let's look at who's poisoning the stream, including some of our own actions. So I feel like in order for us to honor the context that we work in, that are distinctives of transformational development, creating beloved community, and bearing witness to Jesus, those also pertain to the environment, just as they would to the humanity that's affected by the environment.
Right. You talk a lot about global migration. Explain a little bit of what that is for our churches. Help us understand a little more about that. We know in our distinctives of bearing witness to Jesus and creating beloved community, but tell us a little more about global migration, if you will.
Well, it's one of the huge issues that is affecting humankind, and I think probably in this country we think of it primarily as what is happening at the border. But whatever's happening at the border started somewhere else. And in the context of, let's say, the greater part of global migration, which happens in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, and Europe, Migration takes on cyclical forms. You essentially have extreme poverty that leads somebody to leave their land. They can't make a living anymore because either there are too many in one place, or because the environment becomes so degraded that they can no longer eke a living out. Or there may be issues related to war. There may be issues related to illness or other kinds of conflict that might make people leave. But one of the chief ones we're finding is really a changing climate that has nothing to do with anything that people have done wrong, per se. But one year there's floods, and the next year there's droughts. And a population that is living on the edge, the marginalized groups that we work with, they can't sustain a 2 or 3 year catastrophe. And so what are they left to do? Pack up and go to urban areas or to outside of the country. So in sub-Saharan Africa, migration happens in cyclical forms from one country to the other. Some places they're going up to North Africa to try and make their way to Europe and a better life. And of course, the greatest one recently is out of Syria, going into parts of Europe. Most people wouldn't know that apart from the war in Syria, a lot of the precursor to that was a 7-year drought that brought people into cities where the conflict began. But we can simply not divorce our environment from the issues that affect us daily.
Thank you. That helps us understand a little bit more about what you're talking about specifically and how it affects all of us. It's not specialized just in Africa. It's a world problem that we need to have more discussion about and be extremely prayerful about. Let's go and learn a little bit more about the work of our field personnel, particularly, and some of the things that you do and how you are such an environmentalist and how our churches are able to partner in with that. So let's start with Rick, if you will. If you'll tell us a little bit about cultivating abundance and the good work in Immokalee.
Thank you. Cultivate Abundance was started a little over 3 years ago. With my wife Ellen and I. We both had been field personnel appointed way back in 1994 to serve along the Thai-Burma border. And it was that time that the late 90s, early 2000s, that we were first encountering the global migration. We were working with ethnic groups who had left Burma because of ongoing turmoil, ethnic conflict in that area. And they left a place that was actually quite resource rich, the forest, the land, but because of different types of political contributions, the unrest forced them across the border into Thailand, where there was no land really available for them, much more degradation compared to places that they came from. And so they ended up living in pretty crowded communities along the border. And they were farm workers, a lot of them. Some of them were able to work out access to land and becoming sharecroppers. A few more fortunate communities lived in areas where they could claim some land, but the vast majority needed to hire out on farms, citrus farms, garlic, onion, and other types. And so that was our first exposure. We had a project, the Upland Holistic Development Project, which was established almost 25 years ago, which helped to meet those needs and help them with food insecurity, also helping them with the migrants with documentation and citizenship. We had no idea in those days that we would end up in the States and working with people who were migrants from places such as Mexico, southern Mexico, Guatemala, as well as Haiti. And our work in Immokalee, which started in late 2017, early 2018, is focused on migrants from these three areas. And they've come to find jobs and they're paid poorly, picking the crops. They're exposed to various dangers, including pesticides that are sprayed in the industrial agricultural settings. According to other advocacy groups, they have to work. And for instance, to make minimum wage, they'd need to pick 2 tons of tomatoes per day. And again, as I mentioned before, they live in a food desert. So good food of their choice is difficult to find. So Cultivate Abundance is helping to address that through community gardening.
Rick, I'd like to ask, in your work in Immokalee, as you address this kind of food security that is ironically among farm workers, how do you anticipate that a changing global climate will exacerbate hunger issues?
You know, we are earlier, Sam, the fact that so many are here and came, they didn't come on a lark. You know, they didn't come for Florida's sunny beaches and all that. They came because of difficulty back home. And some of them had farms, some of them didn't. But when you talk to many, the changes in weather patterns, and they may not say climate change, but they would say the inconsistency of rainfall, you know, the drought. And then this past hurricane season, we had Honduras and Nicaragua hit twice within days, within just a couple of weeks, by 2 major hurricanes. It also happened on the Louisiana coast. And we shouldn't be surprised when we see so many people trying to come because there's really very little left for them in terms of livelihood. Honduras and Guatemala have, and Haiti, have the highest levels of food insecurity in the Western Hemisphere. And so it all fits together. And then moving here, they've moved to a region in the Gulf Coast. It's also prone to hurricanes and tropical storms. So in some cases, it's kind of jumping out of the pot and into the fire.
Thank you, Rick. That's really helpful and really gives us who don't live in your situation and helps us not only understand but know how to focus some of our prayer work and getting our churches to pray more for not just you and your ministry but for the world and these environmental issues. Jessica, you live in Danville, Virginia, so a total different situation and area as well. Tell us a little bit about your work there, and as you are getting ready to, also congratulations to you and your ministry for the great award that you had received from the Danville Valley Authority just recently. So share with us a little bit about your work.
Thank you. So I work with the intentional Christian community called Grace and Main Fellowship. My husband, Joshua, and I were some of the founding members of Grace and Main over 11 years ago now. So Grace and Main is an intentional Christian community that practices radical hospitality and shared life among people who have experiences with homelessness, hunger, addiction, food and housing insecurity in the city of Danville. And Danville is a pretty small city, but it's a city that still has a lot of issues that you might see in a more urban context. So for example, 1 in 5 people in the city of Danville is expected to experience food insecurity over the course of any given year. And many of those folks experience it consistently throughout the course of a year. And that means that at some point during the year, these are folks that will have no idea what they're going to eat. So it's not just skipping a meal, it's skipping a meal because you have no way to access a meal. So Grace and Main, we in our practice of radical hospitality over the years and in sharing life with people who have direct experience with homelessness and hunger and food and housing insecurity, it became pretty clear to us early on that living sustainably and caring for the world around us was part of experiencing that radical hospitality with folks who are living on the margins, because the systems at play that lead to climate change, that lead to changes in weather patterns, those affect people who are living in poverty much more significantly than folks who are not living in those situations. So we started as a way of, trying to help folks with some of these issues. We started gardening. Our first community garden actually was built in our own backyard here at our house. And we were able to get some grants and build some garden beds in our neighborhoods. And we built garden beds for people that lived in particular in some neighborhoods that are considered food deserts. So they're not within walking distance of a grocery store. And then we were blessed to be given a piece of land in the city that we have turned into an urban farm in Danville. It is at the end of a road, and it is kind of out of the way. It's in the middle of the city, but just because it's at the end of a dead-end street, you hardly know it when you're down there. And so we provide that as a part of it. We're providing as a green space for people in the neighborhood, and then part of it we are working with a team of leaders from our neighborhoods to operate as a community garden. And we use permaculture principles, so seeking to use renewable resources, renewing the land, renewing the soil, using resources that are available, and gardening in a way that is more sustainable. And we have just really loved being able to do that with our neighbors, and be able to teach and learn together about gardening and creation care in that way.
Jessica, I'm wondering, of course, when you create a garden or a farm, it has to be at least a part of your objective that you're going to harvest from that farm, and you're going to get something good out of it that you can share. And so I imagine that was one of your primary goals. But I wonder, as you have folks that come and volunteer with you in your work, and they work together with the people that you're ministering with, I'm just wondering, what are some of the ways that working that land together builds community and breaks down barriers and possibly even brings healing?
Yeah, I absolutely think that it does, and I think one of the main ways that is accomplished is that, our urban farm is operated by a team of leaders. The majority of our leadership team is made up of people who have direct lived experience with homelessness and food and housing insecurity. So people who've experienced hunger. And so when somebody, we call them our outside volunteers. So we have our leadership team who are our members, and then we have outside volunteers, folks that just come and help us in the garden. So if volunteers come in to help in the garden, they experience what we sometimes call a power flip. So what happens is I have a team of leaders, and they have worked with me. Some of them have worked with us in the garden for 5 years, as long as we've had our urban farm. And so if you come to work with us in our garden, they're the experts. They're the folks that will show you what we're doing, how we do it. They're going to lead the projects that you're participating in. And so it's a way to kind of remind us all about how we are connected. The earth connects us, and we're connected to each other through the earth. Mm-hmm. And it changes minds, and it changes views of how we operate, I guess.
Fascinating work, and not very far from any of us, and for you and Rick both. for us to be able to partner. And in a little bit, we're going to talk some about how our churches can not just be advocates for you, but even possibly mimic some of the great works that you do as well. Jeff, it's a little harder for us to get to you in Macedonia. But we're looking forward to hearing a lot about your work, and know that tonight at the CBF gathering, which will take place at 7 p.m., that you're a part of that conversation as well as we celebrate Earth Week this week. So tell us a little bit about your work and family, and how you got into all of the goodness that you're in.
Well, thank you. As you said, my wife and I, we are field personnel in Skopje, Macedonia. We've been here almost 9 years, so it's been a wonderful opportunity for us to be here and to serve local people. Some of the things that we do kind of really are echoing from what Rick and Jessica have said in their ministries and their work there. We work with local farmers, helping them address things like production, work towards sustainability, work towards community involvement. These are things that we work with here in Macedonia. We engage with local people. All the work that we do, we work really hard to get local people involved, to take leadership roles in the work that we do, so that they take ownership in that work, and that even if we leave, they can still continue that work after us, and that they can expand on that and move forward. One of the things that we've started 5 years ago is what we like to call a cow bank, or a livestock bank, where we will take livestock from our own herds and we loan them as small business loans almost to local farmers to help them increase their production. With that, we also try to build that relationship with these farmers to provide support for them, so that we could provide resources, education, also that we learn from each other. So the farmers then will interact with each other and learn new techniques on how to do agricultural work, especially when it comes to raising livestock and doing those things. An exciting thing that started this year is we started a community garden. I know Rick and Jessica are a few years ahead of us, but we just started this year. So we got a grant that allowed us to work in a community here in Skopje, in an area, again, like repeated from them, is an area of a food desert. You wouldn't think that in a country like this, where there's so much food that's grown around, the produce is fresh, but there are areas where it's hard to get that fresh food. And so we are working in that community. We're engaging local members. We're trying to encourage them. We're trying to get them to participate. And we are in the process of completing our community garden structure, so that throughout this year and into years to come, we will have a location where community members can come and grow food and collect food and have healthy alternatives to the unhealthy food that they are engaged with in their local small neighborhoods. So we're really excited about that future, and moving forward with all the agricultural work that we've done here. So.
Jeff, the other day I was talking to one of your colleagues, field personnel in Kampala in Uganda, and they were remarking, much to my surprise, because I grew up next door in Kenya, that Kampala was considered one of the more polluted cities. I know there's probably a lot of geography that might factor into that, in a lake basin, but I was equally surprised to learn that Skopje in Macedonia is consistently one of the most polluted cities in the world in terms of air quality, I imagine that's particularly in the winter months.
Mhm.
I wanted to ask you what you thought. How does that negatively affect the local population? And what are ways that your and Alicia's work attempt to address those negative effects?
Yes, of course. So the air pollution here in the winter is a significant problem for health. Um, in the winter is when the people start burning things for heat and cooking in their homes. More people are using older vehicles, and the geography also plays in that. We are in a basin, and so it's hard for that air pollution to leave. It really sits on top of the city. And in past years, there would be days where you couldn't see across the street because there was so much smog in the city. And health is a major concern. Lung diseases, asthma, cancers are higher than normal. You would say in the normal cities, similar areas in Europe. And so, one thing that CBF we've done has really been exciting over the last 2 years. We've partnered with the city of Skopje and with UNDP and another couple other local NGOs to create a program where the city would collect agricultural waste from the areas in the basin or in the outskirts of the city. And we would collect that waste and then we would dispose of it properly. Because one of the issues at the end of harvest is farmers would burn their fields. It's a ancient practice that they would do. They would burn their fields instead of plowing under their fields, instead of composting. And what that did is that put tons of particles up into the air. And that, like I said, that air would just sit on top of Skopje for months, and it would just be so bad outside. We were wearing masks before COVID here, so we were very used to that when the mask mandate started coming in. But with that program over the last 2 years, we were able to collect tons, 700 tons of agricultural waste that was prevented to be from burning and now is being composted. It has been disposably properly, and hopefully it will be able to be reused to help farmers with their agricultural production. We've been doing that for 2 years. This next year, we're expecting that program to go on, and that is all thanks to CBF, other partnerships with UNDP, the city of Skopje, and other NGOs that have come together to recognize that there's a problem and we need to address that. So we've been really excited about that. The city has also moved forward on a lot of other initiatives with their buses, with their cars, and then their street program has been amazing. That over the last 2 years, they've been moving towards to address some of these air pollution issues. And I would say that this winter, has been a lot better than previous years. And I think partly, maybe not 100%, but partly it's because the program that we started with our partners to collect agricultural waste and not let it be burned has been a big part of that.
I just think that it's so important to see the cycle that happens there. You've got people either through a practice that doesn't need to happen anymore, or because they're too poor to afford other forms of wood fuel in the winter, that, this pollution is caused, which causes illness. And, young people aren't wanting to stick around for this, and they migrate out of Macedonia to other areas, and opportunity goes down and poverty increases. So those cyclical things is I see even small initiatives and interventions that attempt to break that cycle are so important to bringing people as God's creatures back into their full dignity, and also treating the earth with the dignity that it deserves.
So, well, Jeff, that was very not just educational but enlightening to hear. And living here in Atlanta, we know a little bit of smog, and nothing compared to what you're talking about, probably. But it's always good for us to hear new ways and new thinking. And the Cow Bank has always been a real plus for missions. That's an easy sell for churches. We know that sometimes environmental pieces are harder for our congregations to understand and to get a hold of and to buy into, because we all want a quicker fix, but we know that the long term, it takes a long-term presence, just long-term advocacy rather on our parts to be able to make some of those changes. And so our next question for us is about that. Our churches are engaged. You all have some encourager churches who are engaged in your work and offer some support. But for other congregations who constantly say, what can we do? What can we do to be good stewards, to be good environmentalists? What answers do you have? And not just the standard use less kind of thing, but if there are three things that you could each talk about maybe or recommend that people do, that individuals as well as churches can do to be better advocates for our earth. Jeff, since you've been talking, we're going to let you continue, if that's all right. Let you keep talking. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. I would say very, very tangibly what churches can do is look for ways to engage their community and help them become more environmentally conscious. One of the things that we've done here in Macedonia is that program to collect agricultural waste. What we had to do at the very beginning is do a lot of education. We had to educate the local people about why it's not a good idea to burn your agricultural waste. I mean, that's not a good thing. You should, here's a better way, a different way. So something like that is very important. Engaging with the community, finding ways to learn yourself. On our cow bank, we have put solar panels. So we have solar panels on our barn that produce our electricity that we use for our activities, for milking, for processing the milk into cheese and butter and other things. So those are, really kind of hands-on thing that you could do. Put solar panels on your church. But one thing that I know Sam has done, and we are doing also as well, is it's called carbon offsets. When you travel, it takes amount of carbon to travel either by car or by plane or anything. You use carbon, and so one way that a church can to engage in that is by doing carbon offsets, finding ways to offset the use that you use in your travel and churches can do this. Churches can find ways in their community to do those carbon offsets. And I know CBF is moving and actually trying to find ways to provide that for our CBF churches. And so I would say these are very tangible ways that CBF churches and organizations, our state and local CBF bodies as well, can offer these things and try to participate in these things as well, in discussions and talking about that. So I think that was 3, maybe 4 things. But, there you go.
That's good. That's good. Thank you. And I've been writing some things down so I can share with my own congregation here as well. Rick, tell us a little bit about that based in your work and how our churches can be better environmentalists.
Yeah, I want to echo what Jeff said. That for me, I cannot afford the electrical vehicle that I really, really want. I cannot afford in our home office to have an array of solar panels. Maybe someday, but I can't. So, and there are weaknesses in this, but I do purchase offsets for our own family, our home office, as well as Cultivate Abundance. And I was just looking, my Cultivate Abundance travel is ridiculous. I calculated that running from here to Immokalee numerous times a week, that I am generating over 36,000 pounds of emissions. And then for our own personal travel, just for what Ellen does, Ellen and I going to the market, going to church, whatever, that's around 11,000 pounds. So we do purchase offsets through an agency. It's not perfect. One thing we need to do is cut back as much as we can, but we still need to be in Immokalee. I was just calculating how much from planting trees around my house, and I hadn't got to the backyard, but the front yard, I've got 7,000 pounds of sequestration going on with some of the tropical trees. So that might help. Churches should be looking at anything. I think that just looking at ways to save through lighting, just more efficient light bulbs and timers, and smart use of their campus. The church that I attend in Fort Myers is kind of like a lot of the other churches that we're aware of. It had a lot of lawn. And we have so far since 2000 into 2017, I'd say we've converted just about an acre of that property to church garden. And that church garden, they've come alongside us because we've all had an interest in Immokalee. And so they've grown over 5,000 pounds worth of food that matches the cultural preferences of people from Haiti and Mexico and Guatemala. I was out there earlier today and found a nice, pretty bunch of bananas that just happened to be ready and threw it in the truck. This is a low time of year. Later in a couple of months, we're going to have a lot of mangoes. We've got field crops, and we have challenged other churches in this area to do the same. So far, we have around 32 sites, not just churches, but homes, church members and friends and institutions who are also donating and sending that food along to the same food pantry that we grow for. So that would be an area that I would challenge. I would challenge churches, CBF churches, to be looking at the migrants in their community or any other of the folks that are on the margins. But if they do want to reach out to some of the migrants, we're happy to consult with them about crops and even provide some seeds of certain things. We sent some seeds up to Kansas City, a Guatemalan maize, and another church in Wingate, North Carolina, and other seeds up to Rome, Georgia recently. So those are small ways, but they all add up.
Yeah, certainly does. That's you filled my page, and so I'm moving my sticky note to page number 2 now. So thank you, Jessica. What about you? What are some practical things?
Well, I was writing down some things that I wanted to say, and some of them have already been talked about, but I would reiterate for sure. I think reducing grass is absolutely a necessity. Just grass it's a resource hog. It requires a lot of water. It uses a lot of gasoline to keep it trimmed and neat. And so even just finding little spots where you can take the grass up and put in something. And if your church doesn't have the resources to run a garden, research native plants and just plant some native plants, plant some trees. Trees are excellent for carbon sequestration. And there are some trees that you can plant that grow rapidly, and rapidly growing trees sequester more carbon. So, look into what is native in your area, and even just take a small piece of the grass and turn it into a native plant garden. I always advocate community gardens because so many churches have space and they have gardeners. and people that want to make use of the space in that way. So if you have the space and you have the gardeners and the people that want to do that, absolutely do a community garden. Get connected in your neighborhoods and find people in your neighborhoods that are interested. We garden with people who don't have space of their own to garden with. And so they come up and they're allowed to use some of our space to have their own garden within our urban farm. So that's something that churches could potentially also do. Find people in your neighborhood who would like to garden, who can't because they don't have the space, and offer them some of your space. One of the things that we advocate in Grace in Maine is to live more simply. Just find ways to consume less. And it could be as simple as, remembering your reusable bags when you go to the grocery store, reducing that plastic, using a water filter instead of bottles of water. Try to find ways to cut back on what you're throwing away. Get a volunteer to wash the dishes instead of using the styrofoam cups at the church for your coffee. These are all little things, but if everybody does a handful of little things, then that adds up.
Yeah. It not only adds up, it adds up to a lot. This morning on, I don't remember if it was on NPR or something, it was said that our daily use of disposable straws for the world circulates the globe twice a day. And also just that's kind of become the fashionable thing in the States a lot, is to make sure we're, using less straws. And that's great and wonderful, but there are also so many other things that we can be doing as well. And these are all really great examples. Sam, do you have anything else to add to that vein for our churches?
Yeah. And I know we don't like to hear it. We love projects that we can do. We love things that we can externalize to make a difference, and it's really much harder to change our lifestyle and habits. One thing I was interested to learn is that 40% of all food goes to waste in this country. That can be before it's brought to market through agricultural waste, or it can be thrown off of the plate waste. You think about the amount of other resources that are being used to get food production to where it should be, and we're throwing half of it away. I don't know if I have the power as me to change all the agricultural waste, although I would love to see a revision of our farm bill and the crops that we consider that drive our economy. But I can consume more responsibly and use better what I've been gifted with. So it does boil down to me in that regard. Another thing that's just a no-brainer, and my colleagues have already touched on it, is really don't buy what you don't need. I wonder if in this country we actually had the same manufacturing capability that we used to have, and we actually produced all the things that we consume. The pollution would be astronomical, but we've exported all of that to China and parts of Asia, where it's all being made and we don't see the after effects of it. I talked about Macedonia, but the top 200 most polluted cities in the world are in China because they produce everything that we consume. So we may not see it right here. We still have forests and beautiful lands around us, but we've externalized our pollution. On a hopeful note, though, I would say plant a tree, and here's what I mean by that. A few years ago, we were on one of our Kutana trips with a group, and I had this great idea. We're going to offset all of the carbon we use to fly over and back by planting trees while we're there. Until I started doing the research and figured out that we would have to plant 20 trees each, and they would have to live for 20 years in order for that amount of carbon to be sequestered. So we did plant trees, but we did not plant that many. But it spurred me, for that reason and other reasons, to start a project with our work that's ongoing in Kenya, Africa Exchanges work, a project called Trees for Life. We have almost 1,000 children a year go through our integrated child development centers. These are kindergarten children. And we thought, what if we pair each of these children with trees? And so now every child who goes through our program plants 3 trees a year. We have established tree nurseries at 6 of our centers. Every child, every term, plants a tree in their homestead with their family, of course. And the incentive is that if that tree lives for a year, there is $1 that comes to that family for every tree that survives a year. In the first term, we plant a fruit tree. In the second term, we plant a flowering tree. And in the third term, a beautiful, big, long-lasting indigenous tree. And by planting those trees, we are preventing soil erosion that causes lots of environmental degradation. We are cooling the temperature of the surface. We are building the health of soil that enables them to continue farming. We are keeping water sources clean. And we're providing a heritage for the future. So those small acts of doing something like planting a tree, if taken to scale, not to mention the fact that trees are the lungs of our world. And you remove the Congo rainforest basin and the Amazon, and we're done for. So we better start protecting trees, even if it's a little more artificially than an indigenous rainforest. So these are areas that are available to all of us. And if you are lacking the ability to sponsor those, we will certainly give them to you. And Jessica, you mentioned grasses. And of course, here in this country, we think of grass as things that are going to be mown. But hayfields also sequester carbon. And in Africa, grasslands, if you look at the root sequestering feature, is at least as tall as the grass. And if left and not mowed and used, like we use it here just for pretty, it actually provides thatching for roof, fodder for cattle and things of that nature. And so one of our Trees for Life sidekicks is good grasslands, where we replant indigenous grasslands. And the final bit of that in our program called Keeping Earth is beekeeping, because without trees, there are no bees that don't do pollination. And plus, honey provides a great income generation for marginalized communities. So these are some of the ways. And I would just end my little part here by saying, if we look at what our global footprint is in terms of resource use, you look at all the countries around the world, and you can go to changethedate.org or one of these organizations that has all the data. In the United States, we use up our allotted material by February each year. That means from March until the end of the year, we're using stuff that we're borrowing from future generations. Whereas some of the countries that we work in don't use up their quota well past a whole year, because they live closer to the earth, they live more simply, and more carefully in that regard, and because of poverty, quite frankly, they don't have the luxury of overusing. And so I think it's incumbent upon us, if we are truly seeking beloved community, and we're truly seeking transformational development, that we have a role in that here where we live, in areas that we have some say over, not only in helping folks on the other side of the world out of the poverty and things that climate change is occurring in their areas. So I would say that we bear, as a minority of the population of this earth using most of the resources, we probably bear more responsibility than anyone else. And that's the church. We have to be prophetic and active in that area.
Great. Thank you so much. Jeff, you may or may not know that First Baptist Decatur, which is your Encourager Church and my church, we host the local farmers market twice a week. It's on Saturday mornings and on Wednesday afternoons, and it's farmers within I think it's a 30-mile radius that come and fill the front church lawn. It started this past week or starts next week. I can't remember, but it's a great thing, and it really showcases some of the spectacular gardening that people are doing, and it's just a really great asset to our community. And then over in Avondale Estates, which is just 2 miles away, there's one on Sundays, and so you can go to lots of markets in our local community as well. And I think people are buying more into that as we hear more about our environmental concerns and all. One question that came to me via text was, are there policies that CBFers could support to advocate for eco-justice that you know of as well? I don't know, Jeff, Jessica, any Rick or Sam, if you know of something specific that we could advocate for policy-wise.
This is a big deal. It's well documented and reported upon that it's marginalized communities, minority communities, which get the things that everyone else says is not in my backyard. And I would say you wouldn't have to look very far to find this situation. We have discussed this in our group, and whether we organize towards particular activities or whether we challenge ourselves that where we live, what are we going to do about it with our own group of like-minded Christians and other people of faith and conscience, then yes, this is extremely important.
I would say that I would agree with Al Gore here that probably the biggest issue of our time right now that we could really begin to change the game is in energy use and in making energy more sustainable. I would imagine each of you, if your power company is somewhat progressive, has opportunities for you to offset production through or help encourage sustainable electricity generation. I know Duke Power does here, enables us to do that, to get our energy from those sources, and we pay it forward a little bit. It's a little higher, but it's changing the game. But less reliance on oil and gas and more reliance on sustainable electricity and things of that nature, I think are huge. And those are things that need to come into fore with policy. It's harder for us to actually affect that except for by electing certain people. But we can all change our own habits that will end up making a difference in the longer run. And I'll be honest with you, I'm really encouraged. When I see farmers markets, I see a move towards organic food. People are realizing where the future lies. And I know it's small now, but I pray that it will increase. And this very small effort right now by knighting each of you as environmental advocates to be able to go out and be salt and light in your communities and to bring attention to these matters that absolutely pertain to our faith. I see it as one small step that we can make. And may your tribe increase. I know you have colleagues that are also equally engaged, and we want to highlight that area, not as a side project or just to pretend that we're trendy, but actually because we care about the heart of God, and the heart of God spoke creation into being as well as each of us. And we live in this community, and I know that God would want us to nurture it so that we can all have abundant life.
And I'd also like to echo that, but add as well that the current situation we live in, the environmental crisis, or whatever term you would like to use to describe this, is a local and a global issue. And so therefore we need local and global solutions. And you might be thinking, well, I can't attack this globally, but you can locally. You could advocate for your local ordinances, as Rick just mentioned a bit ago. You have the ability to make change in your community and your neighborhood, your city council. These are all avenues available to you as individuals, as community organizations, as churches, to move towards sustainability. And that is something that we have. And as Sam said, we are environmental advocates. We have to stand up for the environment, and the environment right now are the oppressed. And so there we go.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Jeff and Jessica and Rick, as our newly esteemed environmental advocate field personnel. That's your newer title, and all. And so we're so grateful for the work you do, grateful for the example that you are, and for the great information that you've shared this day. And Sam, thank you for all your expertise in this and enlightening us on so many things that we need to be aware of. And I've got 4 complete sticky notes here that I'll be able to share in our Mission Leaders Network, a little more about this and some practical ways
Use
that
both sides.
Yes. Thank you. And that we can be not just an advocate, but better at caring for our earth together, as God has commanded us to do. So on behalf of CBF, thank you for joining us today for this great conversation of missions and how we are advocates for both the earth and people. So we look forward to you joining us again tonight at 7:00 for our community gathering, where you'll hear more from Sam and from Jeff and others regarding Earth Week. And then next month, we'll be back with another CBF conversation, always on the 3rd Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And if we can be of any service to you, please reach out to us. We're here to help you and to walk together in this ministry of life together. So thank you. Have a good day.